Why was the river so loud tonight? Wondered. Maybe it wasn't the water at all, but the pounding in her own chest. She pressed her cheek harder into the grit of the retaining wall, jagged concrete biting through her uniform, grounding her. The air clung heavy with dust and spray from the broken span above, every breath tasting of stone and rust. Her scope glinted briefly, and she cursed at herself, pulling it down tight to her chest. One mistake, one stray reflection, and the two soldiers pinned under the bridge wouldn't live to see the dawn. Through the fractured skeleton of steel and rebar, she'd already mapped them. Trapped, huddled like shadows among slabs of fallen roadway, barely visible unless you knew where to look. One leaned against the other, arms stained dark with blood, while bursts of disciplined gunfire kept them welded to their cover. Every shot forced their heads lower, denying them even the smallest chance to crawl free. Counted the rhythm again. 1, 2, 3. Pause, then 1, 2, 3. Not random, not chaotic. Controlled suppression. Whoever was across that river wasn't just firing blind. They knew exactly what they were doing, holding their prey still long enough to let fear finish what bullets hadn't. Her jaw clenched. She could see desperation in the way the uninjured soldier's shoulders twitched, as if he wanted to break cover and run but knew it would mean instant death. She'd seen that posture before, years back, different battlefield, different men. And she remembered what came after. Silence. The kind that stretched out in her ears until it felt like she might never hear again. Not tonight. She shifted against the wall, letting her eyes adjust without the scope, studying the battlefield naked, raw. The bridge above looked alive, almost breathing, groaning with each push of the current, fractured beams twisting into each other like ribs straining not to snap. The whole structure could collapse at any moment, yet in its brokenness lay cover. Angles of steel, pockets of shadow, slivers of opportunity that only someone desperate or foolish would try to use. And she was both. Her gaze found the half-buried maintenance ladder disappearing into the bridge's underbelly. Rusted, slick, narrow enough to crush the breath out of her if she misjudged. But from down there she could crawl into the ribs of the ruin, find a pocket no one expected. A sniper doesn't need wide ground. She only needs one angle, one clean window. She let her hand slide over the cracked concrete at her side, feeling the chill. It whispered the truth she already knew. Once she left this wall, safety was gone. The enemy had angles on everything open. Every move had to be timed not with courage but with precision. And precision demanded calm. Closed her eyes for half a breath. In that sliver of stillness, a thought crept in, the same one that always came before a push. Why her? Why did she always end up in the no one else wanted, pressing herself against steel and shadow while others got to breathe clean air above? Maybe because she was good at it. Maybe because she didn't complain. Maybe because once, years ago, she'd promised someone she'd never freeze again when others were counting on her. She pushed the memory back before it could sharpen into a face. This wasn't the time. Her hands moved in practiced ritual. Scope lens clean, magazines checked, sling snug, sidearm clipped. Water tight, though she wouldn't drink for hours. Every motion was deliberate, tight against her body, as if her nerves might betray her if she gave them room. The suppressors fired again. Concrete spat chips from the pocket where the soldiers crouched. One of them flinched, lifting his arm, bandaged, bleeding. That sight anchored her decision. No more waiting. If she hesitated, they'd bleed out in the dirt, or worse, the enemy would get bold and finish them. Stripped down to what mattered, rifle, 2 spare mags, canteen, sidearm, everything else stayed. Every ounce cut was another breath saved in the... She whispered the count under her breath as the enemy rotated their bursts. 1, 2, 3. Pause, then again. Her body coiled, heart sinking with the rhythm. On the pause she dashed, boots kicking up dust, body low, lungs burning already. The world seemed to slow to the sound of her heartbeat as she crossed that death stretch. By the time the next burst lit the far bank, she was in the ladder's shadow, pressed against rusted metal. The ladder groaned when she put her weight on it, like the bridge itself was warning her back. She ignored it, easing down rung by rung, boots finding purchase in grime-slick slots. The air changed the deeper she went, cooler, thicker with the scent of wet stone and iron. Light fractured above into slices, illuminating dust like floating embers. The gunfire sounded different here. Closer, sharper, metallic echoes rattling through steel ribs, hammer strikes instead of distant shots. Every creak, every fall of rubble above made her freeze, body tight against the frame, listening for signs she'd been heard. The ladder ended at a mound of rubble. From there she dropped to her stomach, sliding forward into the crawl. Concrete pressed against her chest, steel against her back. Her rifle scraped once, the sound too loud in her own ears. She froze, breath held. Nothing came. So she moved again, inch by inch. Her elbows dug grooves into dust. The roar of the river filled every silence, masking her, but also drowning the subtle cues she normally relied on. Twice, chips of stone rained past her face as bullets struck somewhere too close above. She closed her eyes each time, waiting for the fall of debris to settle before pushing forward. The crawl pressed. She had to tilt her head sideways to fit, helmet scraping steel, boots catching on jagged rebar. The air was warm, stale, her breath fogging against her cheek as she pushed forward. It felt like the bridge was trying to close around her, to trap her with the soldiers she meant to save. But she pressed on. At one junction she paused, studying a slab of concrete hanging by a trembling steel brace. Weak, dangerous, the kind of thing that could crush her, or later, if she was clever, crush an enemy. She marked it in her mind, moved past. Every meter deeper blurred discomfort into focus. The crawl no longer hurt. It was simply movement. Count the seconds, push forward, count again. The rhythm of suppression above became her metronome, the river her cover, her heartbeat the only drum she trusted. And then finally a change. A draft brushed her cheek, cool air, an opening. She slid forward, rifle gliding ahead of her, and saw faint light spilling into a triangular niche. It climbed upward, a pocket just large enough for her body. From there, maybe, a line on the enemy's flank. Her lungs burned, but she steadied them, testing the beams with her weight before climbing into the slot. Every inch of her body protested the cramped angle, knees pressed to concrete, shoulder wedged against steel. But when she settled in and lifted her rifle, her breath caught. The angle was perfect. Through rebar and shadow, the enemy's positions unfolded. One in the upper window, one behind sandbags at the bridge approach, another crouched behind a collapsed warehouse wall. Coordinated, disciplined, dangerous, but all within her reach. Her fingers brushed the frayed safety netting she dragged in with her, dusty, stiff. She draped it over the gap, tucking it into jagged steel, layering it with gravel and concrete shards. From a distance, it would be nothing but ruin. From here, it was her shield. Steadied her rifle through the narrow slot. The first suppressor leaned into his rhythm. 3 bursts, pause, she counted, aligned, exhaled, squeezed. The river swallowed the shot. His body folded back into shadow. No hesitation. Her reticle slid, finding the second suppressor. A sandbag hit him until he rose slightly between bursts. She waited, took him when he lifted. He dropped like the bag he hid behind. The third was cautious, careful, just a sliver of helmet rifle poking from behind the warehouse wall. She waited. The clouds shifted, sunlight flaring against his visor. He twitched instinctively too far. That was all she needed. One shot, he was gone. The field shifted instantly. Precision dissolved into chaos. The enemy fired erratic now, uncoordinated, wild bursts cutting high and wide. The rhythm that had held the soldiers pinned was gone. Felt the bridges groan soften around her, as if even the steel knew the balance had changed. Her allies stirred under the span, one raising a hand. A signal. Ready. She didn't move yet. Control wasn't about rushing. Control was about waiting for the world to catch up to the shot you already fired. So she held, breath steady, scope sweeping, eyes sharp in the shadows. Because tonight, no one would be left behind. Why did her hands feel so steady when her chest still trembled? Had asked herself that question more times than she could count. Nerves lived in her lungs, but her hands never betrayed her. They had been taught long ago that hesitation cost lives, and once they learned that lesson, they never forgot. Now, wedged into a coffin of steel and rubble, she let those steady hands work while her mind carried the fear alone. The far bank had gone strange, erratic muzzle flashes instead of the tight rhythm that had caged her allies beneath the bridge. Shadows ducked and shifted in panic. She tracked each one through the lattice of broken rebar, waiting, measuring. Not every shadow needed a bullet. Sometimes the hint of her presence was enough. She cycled the bolt slow, soft, careful not to let the sound echo louder than the river. The water roared on, relentless, its spray drifting into her hide. That sound masked her shots, but it also masked theirs. She had to rely on instinct, on glimpses of motion that didn't fit with the rhythm of shifting sunlight. Her throat was dry and she swallowed hard, tongue sticking. She could drink, but she didn't. Not yet. Not while the two men under the span waited on her. Their silhouettes moved now, tentative. The uninjured soldier glanced up toward her nest, though he couldn't see her. Some part of him sensed something had changed. And still she didn't signal. Because change wasn't safety. Not yet. Her scope caught a figure sprinting across open ground near the bridge approach. She led him, let his stride line up, and ended him with a single round. Quick. Controlled. Another flicker in the upper windows, someone trying to reclaim the suppressor's post. She dropped him before he steadied his weapon. Every shot stitched silence into the enemy's line. But silence was never complete. Her ribs pressed hard into steel, uncomfortable, but she welcomed it. Pain reminded her she was still here. Pain was her companion. It kept her sharper than comfort ever could. She thought briefly about something her father once told her when she was still a girl learning to shoot on a quiet range far from any war. Your shot isn't the moment the trigger breaks. It's the choice you make before that. After you've chosen, the rest is just mechanics. She wondered what he would think now, seeing her crouched in a ruin on foreign soil, protecting strangers with that same lesson. Would he call it honor? Would he even recognize her anymore? Her eyes burned, but not from dust. She blinked the thought away and pulled her mind back to the scope. Movement again. A helmet shifting too high in cover. She didn't shoot. Instead, she tracked him, memorizing his rhythm, letting him believe he wasn't seen. Sometimes a held shot was stronger than a fired one. Let him feel the illusion of safety. Let him step 1 inch farther when it mattered most. Below, the two soldiers moved. One stumbled, the other hauling him upright. His heart lurched, but she stayed still. If they rushed too soon, if she revealed her position fully, the enemy could still turn this field against them. She pressed the radio to her lips, voice low, steady despite the coil in her chest. "Wait, on my signal, not yet." Static hissed back, then the faintest reply, "Copy." The wounded man sagged, barely holding weight. Could see the dark patch widening on his sleeve, his strength bleeding into the dirt. She clenched her teeth. Time was their enemy as much as the men across the river. Every second drained him, pulled him closer to the edge she couldn't reach with a rifle. She remembered another man, another patch of blood years ago. Not here. Different place. Different war. She'd held pressure on his wound with hands slick and shaking, promising him he'd see home again. He hadn't. She hadn't forgiven herself since. Not tonight, she told herself. Not these two. The far bank stirred again, and she forced herself back into the present. A figure shifted behind the collapsed warehouse wall, trying to angle toward the bridge approach. She tracked him through the scope, measured the wind funneled by the ravine, and sent a round, snapping him back into rubble. Her allies below stiffened at the crack, then ducked lower, still waiting. Good. They trusted her even without seeing her face. Trust was rare. She wouldn't waste it. Another burst of fire erupted, close, sharp, biting into the rubble less than a meter from the trapped men. Scope jerked, searching. There. A shadow tucked tight behind rebar, clever enough to find a sliver angle she hadn't expected. She couldn't thread him directly, the lattice was too tight, but between two bent rods a narrow triangle opened just enough. She held her breath, steadied her pulse, and pressed the trigger. The bullet slid through the gap like it had been waiting for her. The shadow dropped. She exhaled slow. A ghost of relief brushed her chest, then was gone. Her allies stirred again. They wanted to move now. She could feel their urgency, the way the uninjured one leaned forward, ready to drag his wounded partner. She pressed the radio again. Not yet. Hold. She was asking a dying man to wait. Her throat tightened, but she held her tone steady. Every decision here carried weight. Every delay had a cost. But rushing killed faster than bullets. Her eyes scanned wide now, not just the three suppressor nests she'd already broken, but the background, shadowed doorways, flickers of helmets, subtle shifts of stone. She was looking not for enemies but for absence, for the places where someone should be and wasn't. Absence was danger. There, a patch of darkness at the far corner of the building, empty too long. She trained her scope just in time to see the muzzle flash, high and sharp. A bullet sparked off concrete near her allies. She fired back instantly, even before her reticle was perfect. The round punched stone inches from the shooter's face, enough to drive him down. Not clean, but clean enough. Her rifle cycled, bolt smooth, her hand steady even as her lungs stuttered. She pressed her cheek harder into the stock, letting steel and glass anchor her. The two men below shifted again, one lifting a hand toward the ruin where she hid. A silent plea. He couldn't see her, but somehow he knew. She let herself whisper it aloud, even though the radio was silent. "I've got you, just a little longer." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she bit it down. She remembered another voice once, years ago, in a darkened tent after a mission gone wrong. A woman she trusted, whispering, "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't pulling the trigger. It's waiting long enough to know why you're pulling it." Closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. She opened them again, steady. The far bank quieted, enemy fire broken into sporadic, nervous bursts. They were losing control. They knew it. Now, she pressed the radio. Go. The two soldiers moved as one, the stronger dragging the wounded, heads low, bodies weaving through jagged cover. Scope swept ahead of them, clearing paths, shutting down angles before they appeared. A figure darted too close to the bridge approach. One shot sent him back. Another shadow rose in a window. Another shot silenced him. Each round wasn't just a kill. It was a line drawn in dirt, a corridor carved bullet by bullet. She didn't shoot at everyone. She shot at space, at the places where danger might bloom. She stitched control into the battlefield with absence, with denial. The two men zigzagged forward, using slabs of concrete as shields, guided by her unseen hand. The wounded one stumbled, almost fell. Fired again, not at a man but at a wall where a muzzle might appear, the round sparking stone and forcing the unseen to stay hidden. The allies recovered, kept moving. Her rifle shifted, scanning wide, searching for threats she hadn't imagined yet. The battlefield was alive, and she couldn't afford to believe it was done. Her knees ached from the cramped niche, blood rushing pins into her legs. She ignored it, steady as stone. The mission wasn't her comfort. The mission was theirs. And as the two soldiers moved closer to safety, her chest tightened, not with relief but with a weight heavier than before. Because she knew this wasn't finished. Because part of her whispered that maybe, just maybe, the bridge wasn't the only thing broken here. She blinked dust from her eyes, steadied her scope, and followed them. Not just with her rifle, but with her promise. What did silence mean on a battlefield? Had asked herself that before. Sometimes it was safety. Sometimes it was the trap before the storm. Tonight, crouched in steel and shadow, it meant something else: responsibility. Through the lattice of broken rebar, she tracked the two soldiers clawing their way toward safety. Every step they took felt carved from her own breath. The stronger one half-dragged the other, the wounded man's head lolling, his sleeve dark with blood that wouldn't stop. They were close now. Close, but not safe. His finger rested on the trigger, her scope sweeping ahead of them. She didn't look at their faces anymore. Couldn't. If she did, she might lose the discipline to focus on what hunted them. She felt her legs burning, cramped tight from hours crouched in her hide. Pain was nothing new. Pain was just part of the ritual. What unsettled her wasn't her body, but her mind. Because the silence after her last shots wasn't perfect, something felt wrong. The enemy wasn't gone. They were watching, waiting. She could feel it in the stillness, like eyes pressing against her back. Her scope lingered on a collapsed wall near the bridge approach. Too quiet, too clean. Every instinct screamed that someone was waiting there, patient as she was. She thought of a story one of her instructors told years ago, about two snipers lying still for days, neither daring to move until one finally gave himself away with the twitch of a finger. The lesson wasn't about skill. It was about patience. Whoever waited longer lived. But didn't have days, she had minutes. Her radio crackled faintly, a whisper through static. Moving cover. She pressed her mic, voice low. Keep going, I'll hold it. The wounded man stumbled, nearly collapsing. His partner caught him, dragged him upright, kept moving. Their trust was blind. They couldn't see her, couldn't know she was there, except in the way the battlefield bent around them. That trust hit her harder than any recoil. Because she remembered a night years ago when men had waited on her trust and she hadn't been fast enough. She saw their faces sometimes, in sleep she couldn't hold. She told herself for years she would never freeze again, never hesitate. And now, as the silence thickened, she felt the old weight pressing on her ribs. Her hands stayed steady, her chest did not. She adjusted her aim to the collapsed wall, waiting. The two soldiers inched closer, unaware of how thin their corridor really was. The enemy was there. She knew it. She could feel it like a pulse beneath the river's roar. And then movement, a helmet flicker, just a sliver, enough. Her shot cracked, masked by the water. A figure recoiled into dust, rifle clattering. The silence broke. Gunfire erupted again, sharp and chaotic, bullets tearing into the rubble near the men. They froze, ducking low. Scope swept, heart pounding, finding another muzzle flash deeper in the ruins. She fired, dropped him, then shifted, another. Each shot wasn't just aim, it was defiance. But the enemy was waking now. They'd been waiting, coiled tight, and she had cut the wire. The stronger soldier shouted, voice faint even through her earpiece. We can't move. Press the mic. Yes, you can, keep low, trust me. Her words sounded stronger than she felt. Because she was fighting time now, not just men. The wounded soldier sagged more heavily, his legs barely moving. Blood loss. His partner gritted through it but could see it. The weight was pulling both of them down. Her throat tightened. She thought again of the man she once promised she'd save. The man who died anyway. She thought of the blood on her gloves that night, the way she scrubbed and scrubbed, but it never left. Her vision blurred and she blinked hard, forcing it clear. Not tonight. She worked the bolt again, chambering another round. Her shoulder ached from the awkward angle, her elbows pressed too tight into concrete, but she forced the discomfort down. The niche was hers. The battlefield was hers. And she would not fail them. She fired again, creating a hole in the silence, pushing the enemy back one step, then another. Each bullet was a doorway, a thin strip of ground carved open for the men to crawl through. They moved, halting, dragging each other, pausing every few meters to gasp for breath. The stronger soldier looked up again, toward the shadows where she lay, as if he could feel her eyes on him. She almost nodded, almost gave herself away, but she forced stillness instead. Trust worked both ways. Another burst ripped too close, sparks flaring from rebar. Flinched, then steadied. She found the source deep in a ruined corner, clever hidden. She exhaled, aimed through a sliver gap and pressed the trigger. The shot landed true. The silence returned, thinner this time, stretched tight. She breathed out slowly, chest heavy. The two soldiers reached another slab of cover, only 20 meters from the retaining wall, the safe zone. Just a little more. But the wounded man collapsed fully now, dragging his partner down with him. His chest seized. Through her scope, she saw the stronger one shake him, desperate, refusing to leave him behind. Her stomach twisted. She knew that choice, she made it once, and she knew what it cost. She pressed the mic again, her voice softer but edged with steel. "Don't stop. Not now, get him up. You're almost there." Static, then a broken reply. He can't." "Cut him off," voice firmer. "Then you carry him, do you hear me? You carry him." Her own words cracked something inside her because they weren't just for him. They were for herself. For the night she hadn't carried, the night she'd let go. Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't look away from the scope. The stronger soldier hauled the wounded one over his shoulders, staggering under the weight but moving. One step, another. His knees buckled, but he forced them forward. Covered every step with bullets, each shot clearing space, denying angles, burning her resolve into the ruins. Her body ached, trembling now, but her hands never wavered. This was what silence meant, she realized. Not absence, not peace. Silence was the weight of choices no one saw, the quiet that lived behind every gunshot, every pause, every man saved or lost. And tonight she would carry it. For them, for him, for herself. The retaining wall was close now, so close. But the silence was breaking again. How much weight could one moment carry? Asked herself as she adjusted her scope, breath shallow in the dust-filled air. Sometimes a single second decided everything. The difference between standing or falling, between living or bleeding out into dirt that would never remember you. Tonight, that second pressed closer with every heartbeat. The stronger soldier staggered under his comrade's weight, dragging him toward the retaining wall. Their boots scraped over rubble, bodies weaving through broken slabs, shadows bending around them like fragile shields. Tracked them through her scope, her rifle the thin thread holding their lives together. The silence between shots unnerved her. It wasn't victory. It was a predator's quiet, the kind that came when the enemy shifted their angle, planning something she couldn't see. She lived through that silence before. It was never mercy. Her legs throbbed, blood locked in the cramped crouch of her hide. Her knees were numb, her shoulders raw where concrete bit through fabric. She told herself none of it mattered. The body didn't command tonight. Only discipline did. The bridge groaned above her, a wounded animal straining against its own weight. Steel twisted against steel, beams scraping in long, mournful notes. Felt it in her bones, the vibration rolling through her ribs. She knew the truth. The whole span was moments away from giving way. And if it fell now, those men would be crushed before they ever reached her side. She cycled the bolt, chambering another round, scanning the far bank. Shadows stirred in the collapsed warehouse again, regrouping, rethinking. They weren't done. She could see it in the flickers of helmets, the brief muzzle glints hidden in dust. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible, "Not yet. You don't get them, not tonight." Her radio crackled with the labored voice of the stronger soldier. "We're almost." The strain in his words hit her harder than the gunfire. She could hear the weight of his friend pulling him down, the ragged breath of a man breaking but refusing to stop. Pressed her mic, voice sharp but steady. "Keep moving, don't look back, I'll handle it." Her scope snapped to movement, an enemy rushing from the shadows, closing distance fast, weapon raised. She let him, squeezed, dropped him. Another figure emerged, slower, more cautious, creeping along cover. She shifted, exhaled, ended him too. Every shot was a stitch in the fragile corridor she was sewing across the field. One missed stitch, and the whole fabric would tear. The soldiers stumbled again. The wounded man slipped from his comrade's shoulders, crashing onto concrete. His chest seized. The uninjured one knelt, frantic, trying to lift him again. Her scope tracked past them, scanning ahead. She saw it then, an enemy crouched low behind a fractured wall, barrel already trained toward the fallen pair. Her breath froze, too late. She didn't think, she moved. The shot broke, faster than she could steady but clean enough. The bullet snapped into the wall inches from the man's head. He flinched, ducked, lost his chance. Second shot ended him before he could rise again. Her heart hammered. She cycled the bolt too hard, the metal clack echoing in her ears like a scream. She forced her hands steady again, pressed her cheek into the stock. Below, the stronger soldier dragged his partner upright once more, slinging him over his back with desperate strength. He stumbled, nearly fell, then kept moving. His throat tightened at the sight. She had seen men give up before, drop their wounded, run for themselves. Not him. Not tonight. He carried his friend like the weight was his own body. And in that image, felt a memory burn through her. A night lit by flares, mud thick with rain, her own teammate lying broken, begging her not to leave him. She had tried, God, she had tried to lift him, but her arms failed. Her courage failed. She had called for help, voice cracking, while gunfire rained down, and when rescue never came, she had left him there in the mud. His voice haunted her still, not his last words but the silence after them. She blinked hard, forcing the vision back into the dark corners of her mind. This was different. She wouldn't fail this time. The bridge groaned again, louder, a shudder ripping through the beams around her. Dust rained down, stinging her eyes. One more collapse and the span would drop into the river. She pressed the mic, "Run now." The stronger soldier obeyed, legs buckling but moving, hauling his comrade across the last stretch. Fired ahead of them, covering open ground, every shot carving another meter of safety. She tracked shadows to the edges of her vision, refusing to blink. A muzzle flash she shot, a helmet flicker she shot, a shadow creeping too far she shot. Each round was a promise, you will not touch them. Her rifle grew hot against her hands. Her shoulder throbbed. Her lungs burned with dust. Still she fired, each breath timed, each movement deliberate. The soldiers stumbled into the shadow of the retaining wall, collapsing behind it, finally out of sight. Relief surged so sharp it hurt. But didn't lower her rifle. Because the enemy wasn't finished. Through her scope, she saw figures still lurking deeper in the ruins, too far for clean shots but close enough to try again if she dropped her guard. They weren't pressing forward now, but waiting, watching, perhaps hoping she would reveal herself when she joined her allies. Her chest heaved, but she forced her breath even. Control wasn't just about the trigger, it was about stillness after. The river roared beneath her hide, mist cooling her face, washing away the grit of the fight. For the first time in hours, she let her eyes linger on the broken span above, steel bent like ribs of a carcass, concrete shattered like bone. Somehow it had held, long enough for her to carve a path. But it wouldn't hold forever. Her knees ached as she shifted back from the firing gap, her whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was leaking out. She slid down carefully, retracing her crawl through steel and stone, each step slow, controlled, unwilling to let noise betray her. Every scrape of her boots against rebar, every groan of shifting beams, reminded her how close collapse still was. When she reached the ladder, she paused, one gloved hand resting on rusted rungs. She listened to the bridge, to the water, to the wind threading through cracks. It felt like the span itself had fought with her, had strained and held so she could do her part. Maybe she imagined it, maybe not. She climbed down into open air, crossing the short ground toward the retaining wall. The two soldiers looked up as she approached, their faces pale, eyes wide with something between gratitude and disbelief. One leaned hard on the other, blood still soaking his arm. Gave them a single nod, nothing more, words weren't needed. They returned it silent. For a moment, the three of them stood together in the shadow of the broken span, bound not by orders or rank, but by survival, by the quiet truth that sometimes the difference between life and death was just one person who refused to let go. Turned her eyes back to the bridge. From this angle in the fading light it looked almost peaceful. The violence was hidden now, wrapped in silence and dust. But she knew better. She knew it would always be a graveyard waiting for the next fight. The river roared on, indifferent, carrying mist into the air as if washing the field clean. She adjusted the sling of her rifle and stepped past the wall. The mission wasn't over, not yet. Silence followed her, heavy, unbroken. And in that silence carried everything. How long could silence follow you before it became something else? Didn't know anymore. Out here in the shadow of the bridge, with gunpowder still clinging to her gloves and grit burning her throat, silence wasn't peace. It was memory. It was everything she didn't say, pressing harder than any bullet. She stood with her rifle slung tight, scanning the edge of the ruins one last time. The far bank was still now. No muzzle flashes, no shifting shadows. The enemy had pulled back or gone still, waiting. Either way, the field belonged to her, for now. Behind her, the two soldiers leaned against the retaining wall, breathing hard, their bodies sagging with the weight of what they'd just survived. The wounded one clutched his arm, blood soaked deep into his sleeve. The stronger man, his hands raw, his uniform torn, kept one steadying grip on his comrade's shoulder, as if afraid he might slip away if he let go. They hadn't spoken since she reached them. Didn't expect them to. Some bonds weren't made with words. She scanned the ruins again, then turned back. "We need to move." The stronger soldier nodded, helping his partner upright. The wounded one winced but didn't argue. His eyes met hers for a moment, tired, bloodshot, full of something that wasn't quite fear anymore. Gratitude maybe, or just disbelief. She didn't hold his gaze, didn't need to. The three of them moved in silence, stepping over rubble, skirting twisted rebar and shattered concrete. The river roared beside them, spraying cool mist that clung to their skin. Every step felt heavier than the last. His body ached, every muscle screaming from the crawl, the shots, the hours of tension coiled tight in her chest. But she kept moving, rifle in hand, eyes always scanning. The war didn't care that she'd just saved two men. It didn't care that her knees shook or her lungs burned. The next fight was already out there, waiting. She thought of radioing command, calling for, but her throat tightened. What would she even say? That she'd broken enemy lines alone? That she'd crawled into a bridge's skeleton and carved a path with her rifle? That she'd carried ghosts from one war into another and somehow walked out again? No, they wouldn't understand. They never did. The stronger soldier broke the silence first. "You came alone." Didn't answer right away. Her eyes swept the ridge above, tracing shadows. "I came because no one else could get close." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "You a sniper." A beat, then she said, "Sometimes." That was all. They walked on. The wounded man coughed, spitting dust, blood flecking his lips. Slowed her pace just enough to let him keep up, watching the way his boots scuffed stone. He shouldn't be walking. He should be on a stretcher in a med tent hooked to fluids. But the med tent was miles away and the stretcher didn't exist. Out here, pain wasn't a reason to stop. It was just another thing to carry. She glanced at him once more. "You're losing too much blood. We need to find shelter soon." The stronger soldier looked around. "There's a half-collapsed substation about a click east, if it's still standing." Gave a short nod. "We'll check it." They kept moving, weaving through wreckage, the sky above them bruised with dusk. As they walked, her mind drifted, not to the mission, not to orders, but to something quieter. A memory. Years ago, different country, different war. She'd been younger, greener. Still thought there was a clean line between good and bad. Still thought you could walk off the battlefield and leave the weight behind. She'd been wrong. That mission had gone wrong fast. her unit pinned down in a dry riverbed, snipers hemming them in from the cliffs. She'd been the only one with a clear shot, the only one who could crawl far enough to get a line. She killed 3 men that day, saved her team. But when she returned, they looked at her differently. Not with admiration, not even thanks. With silence. Because sometimes, doing what needed to be done left something on you that others didn't want to see. She never forgot that silence. And tonight she'd heard it again. The stronger soldier's voice broke her thoughts. You were under the bridge the whole time. She nodded once. He shook his head slowly. We didn't even know you were there. Good. That was the point. They reached the substation just as the last light bled from the sky. The building was half collapsed, roof sagging, walls cracked, but it stood. Inside it was quiet, dusty, safe enough. They settled the wounded man against a wall, knelt beside him, tearing gauze from her pack. Her hands were steady, even as she peeled back the soaked bandage. The wound was bad. A deep graze along the upper arm, muscle torn, bleeding steady. Not fatal, not yet, but it needed real care soon. She cleaned it, packed it, wrapped it tight. The soldier winced but didn't flinch. You a medic too? He asked, voice hoarse. Didn't look up, used to be. That surprised them. She saw it in their eyes. But she didn't explain. Once years ago, she'd patched men together in the middle of firefights, her hands shaking, her mind screaming to keep them alive. She'd been good at it, but being good didn't mean they lived. Too many didn't. That was when she picked up a rifle. Not because she wanted to kill. Because she couldn't stand watching from the sidelines while men bled. She tied the bandage off, sat back. He'll hold for now. The stronger soldier nodded, relief flickering in his expression. Thank you. She met his eyes just for a moment. Don't thank me yet. They rested in silence, the air thick with dust and exhaustion. Outside, the wind whispered through broken windows. The world beyond the substation remained dangerous. Sat with her back to the wall, rifle across her knees, eyes on the doorway. The soldiers dozed in shifts, too tired to stay awake, too wired to sleep deeply. She didn't sleep at all. Sleep meant dreams. And she didn't want to dream. She thought instead about the bridge, about the steel ribs and the rebar and the mist from the river, about how the structure had grown beneath her, how it had held just long enough for her to do what she needed to do. She thought about the moment she fired her first shot, the way the man folded into shadow, the way the silence changed. She thought about the weight she carried, invisible but heavy. And she thought about how tomorrow it would all start again. Because war didn't end with rescue. War kept going. And so did she. The night passed slow. The stars overhead were dim through smoke and cloud. The river's roar was a distant hum. Stayed awake, watching, waiting. Not for the enemy. For the weight to settle. It never did. By morning they would have to move again. Command would call. Orders would come. Another mission, another risk. But for now, they were alive. And that had to be enough. She glanced at the 2 men sleeping against the wall. The wounded one's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. The stronger one twitched in restless dreams. She wondered if they'd remember her. She wondered if they'd ever know what it cost her to crawl into that bridge, to lie still in dust and shadow, to fire shot after shot with a calm hand and a screaming heart. Probably not. That was okay. Because some acts didn't need applause. They just needed to be done. She leaned her head back against the wall, eyes half closing. The silence pressed in, but she didn't fight it. Not tonight. Sometimes silence wasn't the enemy. Sometimes it was just the sound left behind when you'd done what needed doing. Why did Dawn always feel heavier after a night like that? Shifted her rifle against her knees, the gray light bleeding into the broken substation, brushing pale across the cracked walls. The river hummed faintly in the distance, softer now, as if the whole world had taken a slower breath. But inside there was no ease. The two soldiers stirred awake, groggy, their bodies stiff from sleeping against concrete. The wounded one blinked against the bandage she had wrapped, pain still painted across his face. The stronger one sat up, shoulders tense, as though waiting for orders that hadn't come. Hadn't slept. Her eyes were hollow but her body steady, every sense stretched thin across the silence outside. She spent the night counting shadows, watching the doorway, listening for the crack of movement. It never came. Now morning carried the weight of questions. The stronger soldier's voice broke the stillness. Command will expect a check-in. Nodded once she, known it was coming. He pulled a battered radio from his pack, fiddling with the dials, static crackling in the air. After a few moments a clipped voice answered. Words traded, call signs, status, location. Then orders. Listened without showing it, her chest tightening. Extraction was delayed. Hostile forces still moved in the area. The soldiers were instructed to push east, regroup with another unit. Risky, but necessary. Necessary, that word again. The stronger soldier looked at, his face asking a question his mouth didn't. Would she come? Would she lead? Would she keep doing what she'd done under the bridge? Adjusted her sling, checking the rifle's weight. East isn't safe. He frowned. Command says. Command isn't here. Her tone was flat, quiet, but it carried weight. He hesitated, then looked away. He knew she was right. He felt the danger in his bones, same as she had. The wounded man coughed, his breath ragged. He wasn't fit to march east, not at the pace command wanted. His eyes lingered on him. She thought of all the men she'd watched die because someone far away decided what was necessary. She thought of promises made in the mud, of faces that still followed her when she closed her eyes. Her jaw clenched. She spoke softly but with steel under it. If we move east, he won't make it. Silence hung heavy. The stronger soldier looked between them. His duty was pulling one way, his loyalty another, recognized the war on his face. She fought it herself too many times. Then what? He asked finally. Exhaled. We find cover, wait, heal what we can. Move when it's possible, not just because someone said so. He shook his head, frustration rising. That's disobeying orders. She met his eyes, unflinching. It's surviving. The words landed like stones. He looked away again, conflicted. He wasn't used to choosing. Orders were supposed to be clear, the chain of command solid. But war didn't care about clarity. War asked you to bleed for strangers and then decide if it was worth it when the moment came. Knew she'd bled enough to understand. The wounded soldier shifted, his voice weak but firm. I don't care about orders. I just don't want him. He nodded at his partner to throw himself away, trying to carry me somewhere I won't make it. The stronger soldier's eyes snapped to him, pain flickering there. Don't say that. Stayed silent, letting them speak what needed to be spoken. The wounded man swallowed hard. We've all seen it before. Men left behind. Men dying on roads because someone said move faster. I don't want to be that weight. His throat tightened. She thought of the man she hadn't carried years ago, his voice fatting in the mud. She thought of her own silence after, how she'd promised herself never again. She leaned forward, voice steady but quiet. You're not a weight, not to him, not tonight. We're going to keep you alive. Both soldiers looked at her, surprised at the certainty in her tone. She didn't flinch under their gaze. Because this time she meant it. They argued no more. Instead, they gathered what little strength they had, rationing water, checking gear, patching the wounded arm again. The stronger soldier cast nervous glances toward the east, as if command's voice might materialize out of thin air to reprimand him, but kept her eyes on the doorway, calm, waiting. Hours passed slow. The morning light grew stronger, filtering in through cracks in the substation roof, catching dust in golden shafts. The world outside remained quiet, but knew it was the kind of quiet that pressed down, waiting to break. She sat still, her rifle balanced across her knees, her breathing slow. The soldiers dozed again in turns, too tired to resist. Didn't doze. Instead, she thought of the word orders, of how many times she'd followed them, how many times she'd ignored her instincts, obeyed the command, only to watch someone die anyway. She thought of the cost of obedience, the cost of defiance. Both were heavy, both left scars. But tonight, under the bridge, she hadn't waited for orders. She hadn't asked. She crawled into steel and shadow because it was the only way. And that choice, that disobedience, had saved 2 men. Her chest ached with the truth of it. The stronger soldier stirred awake again, restless. He glanced at her, his voice low. "Why did you come for us?" Looked at him. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then quietly, "Because I couldn't let you die like that." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't meant to inspire. It was just the truth. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, but she saw something soften in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or just understanding. The wounded soldier opened his eyes, whispering, "We owe you." Shook her head, "You owe me nothing, just live." They fell silent again, the weight of her words filling the space. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint echoes from the ruins, a distant pop of gunfire, voices too faint to understand. Stiffened, her rifle lifting, eyes narrowing. The enemy hadn't gone. They were still here, still moving, still searching. She raised a hand, silencing the soldiers before they could speak. The silence stretched long, filled with distant echoes. Breath slow, steadying herself, she knew what was coming. War never let you rest long. And choices had to be made all over again. How close could danger come before it pressed against your skin? Felt it now, in the hollow silence between each faint echo outside. The substation walls trembled slightly, as though the broken building itself sensed the weight shifting back toward violence. The wounded soldier stirred, blinking through pain. His partner adjusted him gently, whispering something couldn't hear. She kept her rifle trained on the doorway, every muscle tense. The echoes came again, boots on rubble, muted shouts in a language she didn't know. Enemy, moving closer. His chest tightened. She had known they wouldn't stay gone. The bridge had cost them too much. They would want to reclaim what they'd lost, silence what they hadn't killed. The stronger soldier noticed it too. His eyes darted to her, fear flashing quick before he covered it with resolve. "They're coming." She nodded, yes. The wounded man whispered, "We can't move fast enough." His mind raced. The options were razor-thin. Stay here, and the substation would become a trap the moment enemy boots crossed the threshold. Move east, as command had ordered, and the wounded man would collapse before they made it half the distance. She pressed her back against the wall, letting the cold concrete steady her. She had been here before, in places where choice wasn't really choice at all, where every option carried loss. Her father's voice came back to her, quiet, from years ago on that peaceful shooting range. "The hardest part isn't the shot, it's the decision to take it." The stronger soldier crouched beside her, whispering fast. "We could try to circle north, cut across the drainage ditch. It's cover at least." Shook her head. "They'll see us before we get halfway, too exposed." "Then what? Sit here and wait to die?" His voice cracked, more anger than fear. Turned, met his eyes. "No, we make them wait to die." The words came steady, but inside her chest her heart thundered. The wounded soldier coughed, shaking his head weakly. "You'll get pinned down, you'll." Cut him off softly. "We won't, not if we move when they don't expect it." Silence, just the river humming faintly outside and the groan of the broken building. Checked her rifle, her spare magazines, her sidearm. Each motion was methodical, ritualistic. She could feel both soldiers watching her, but she didn't look at them. She couldn't. She thought of the bridge again, of how she'd crawled into its broken ribs and turned ruin into shield. She thought of the man she once left behind, of the silence that haunted her ever since. This time, she wouldn't leave anyone, even if it meant she didn't leave herself. The footsteps grew louder now, closer, crunching over rubble. A voice barked an order, the sound of a rifle being cocked. Whispered, "Stay low, don't move until I tell you." She moved to the doorway, pressed against the crumbling wall, peering through a narrow crack. Figures approached, shadows weaving through the ruins, rifles raised, cautious but advancing. Too many, more than she could count in the shifting light. Her breath slowed, steadied. The world seemed to shrink to the scope, the stock against her shoulder, the cold press of stone at her back. Her shot wasn't just a bullet, it was a signal. And when she fired, everything would change. The stronger soldier touched her arm lightly, almost without meaning to. "If you don't come back," he stopped, words catching. Didn't look at him, she couldn't afford it. She just said quietly, "Sometimes we don't come back, that's not the point." He fell silent. The first enemy figure moved into full view, his body angled, weapon sweeping. Exhaled. Her finger tightened. The shot cracked, swallowed by the roar of the river. The man dropped. Chaos erupted instantly, shouts, muzzle flashes, debris sparking. Stayed low, firing again, cycling the bolt smooth, steady. One target fell, then another. The soldiers behind her flinched at each shot, but she didn't pause. Every bullet was another breath bought, another heartbeat stolen back from death. But the enemy kept coming. The substation shook with impacts, walls splintering, dust filling the air. Bullets punched through cracks, ricocheting off stone. The wounded soldier cried out as debris rained down, his partner shielding him with his own body. Gritted her teeth, shifting position, firing through a jagged hole in the wall. She clipped another enemy, saw him fall. But for every one that dropped, another pressed forward. The air was thick with dust, the roar of rifles, the pounding of her own heart. Her radio crackled faintly, command's voice distant through static. "Unit 6, report status. Do you copy?" She didn't answer, not because she couldn't, because the men in this room needed her more than a voice miles away. She thought of all the times she'd obeyed, all the times obedience meant watching someone bleed while she waited for orders that came too late. Not this time. She shifted again, sliding to a new angle, firing through another gap. Her shoulder throbbed with each recoil, her arms heavy, her knees burning. But her hands stayed steady. The stronger soldier shouted over the gunfire, "We can't hold them." His voice cut through, low, firm, unshakable. "We don't need to, we just need to outlast them." It wasn't bravado, it was truth. The enemy wasn't infinite, their patience wasn't infinite. And she was. She could wait. She had waited in silence under bridges, in dust filled, in memories that never let go. She could wait longer than anyone. The enemy pressed closer, but each time they rose, she cut them down. The air reeked of gunpowder, dust, sweat. Her throat was raw, her lungs burning. Still she fired again and again, the rhythm almost like breathing. The wounded soldier groaned, whispering, "You can't do this forever." His lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. Because forever wasn't the point. Now was. The fight surged, then faltered, then surged again. She could feel it, enemy morale fraying, their push losing coherence. Shouts grew frantic, gunfire scattered. She pressed her cheek harder to the stock, eyes narrowing. One more shot, then another, then silence. The silence stretched, thick, heavy. And slowly, too slowly, the footsteps retreated. Shadows pulled back. The ruin fell quiet again, except for the ringing in her ears and the ragged breaths of the men beside her. She stayed crouched, rifle still trained, refusing to believe it was over. Not yet, not ever. Minutes passed before she lowered the weapon. Her arms trembled as the weight left them. Her chest heaved, lungs clawing for air. Sweat stung her eyes, mingling with dust. The stronger soldier looked at her, disbelief written plain. You held them. Didn't answer. She didn't feel like a victor. She felt like the bridge again, broken, groaning, barely holding together. She slumped against the wall, rifle across her knees, listening to the silence settle. But deep inside she knew the truth. This wasn't the end. The war would come again tomorrow, in another ruin with other names, other faces. And she would crawl into shadow again, steady hands carrying a screaming heart. Because that was who she was now. Not a medic, not just a sniper. Something in between. Something war had carved out of her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence press in. And for once she didn't fight it. Why did endings never feel like endings? Asked herself as she leaned against the cracked wall of the substation, rifle still across her knees. The silence after the fight was heavy, but it didn't feel like peace. It felt like the pause between storms, the moment when the sky holds its breath before thunder comes again. The two soldiers beside her stirred. The stronger one rubbed grit from his face, his body sagging with exhaustion. The wounded man dozed, his bandaged arm cradled against his chest, his breath shallow but steady. They were alive. That was supposed to be enough. But knew better. War never gave you clean victories. It gave you scars disguised as survival. She rose slowly, knees screaming from hours crouched in stone and shadow. She stretched her stiff arms, rolling her shoulders, then crossed to the doorway. Outside, the ruins lay quiet, sunlight bleeding pale through smoke and dust. The stronger soldier limped to her side, scanning the horizon. His voice was low, almost reverent. "You kept us alive." Didn't answer. She wasn't sure if it was true. She hadn't kept them alive. She just delayed the world's attempt to take them. He glanced at her, uncertain. "They'll send for us soon, right?" His eyes stayed on the horizon. "Maybe, or maybe they'll tell us to keep moving." "Can he?" His glance shifted to his wounded comrade. "Didn't look back. He'll try." The silence stretched between them. Not hostile, not comfortable, just heavy. Finally the radio crackled again, static hissing through the air. A clipped voice. "Unit 6 reports status. East Sector compromised. Extraction rerouted. Rendezvous at Sector Delta, grid mark 93. The stronger soldier grabbed the radio, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "Copy, 2 wounded, 2 mobile. Request immediate support." Static then. "Negative, no support available. Move to grid 93, extraction in 4 hours. Survive until then." The line went dead. The soldier lowered the radio, jaw tight. He didn't have to. She already knew what the order meant. 4 hours on foot, with a wounded man. Exhaled slowly, her hand tightening on her rifle. 4 hours was a lifetime in this place. 1,000 things could happen before then, none of them good. The wounded soldier stirred awake, his voice hoarse. "What did they say?" The stronger man hesitated, then forced the words out. "Extraction, 4 hours, East Sector." The wounded soldier's eyes closed. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. They all knew what it meant. Crouched beside him, checking the bandage, adjusting the wrap. Her hands were steady, though her chest ached. "We'll move," she said softly. The wounded man's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "You make it sound simple." Her gaze flicked to his, steady. "Simple doesn't mean easy." They gathered what they had left: water, ammo, grit. Then they moved. The sun rose higher, heat pressing down, dust catching in their throats. They walked slow, every step deliberate, every sound by the silence around them. Lead rifle sweeping arcs, eyes sharp. The stronger soldier carried his partner's weight again, his jaw set in grim determination. Every few minutes stopped, scanning, listening. Shadows shifted in the ruins, but nothing moved against them. Not yet. Her mind drifted as they walked, not to command, not to the mission, but to something quieter. She thought of all the men she had carried in pieces, the ones she'd patched up, whispering lies about going home, even when she knew they wouldn't, the ones she'd promised to protect, only to kneel in their silence minutes later. And she thought of tonight. The bridge, the crawl, the silence that had bent around her as she fired, her steady hand saving lives her heart could barely hold. She wondered if it would ever balance, the lives she lost and the ones she saved. She doubted it, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was carrying it anyway. Hours passed slow, the horizon inching closer. The wounded soldier faltered more with each step, his weight pulling heavy on his comrade. Wanted to take him, to shoulder him herself, but she knew her role wasn't wait, it was watch. If her rifle failed, they all failed. So she walked ahead, her eyes cutting through shadows, her ears tuned to silence. They reached the grid mark as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across broken earth. Extraction hadn't arrived. The stronger soldier cursed under his breath, lowering his friend gently to the ground. The wounded man's face was pale now, sweat slicking his brow. Scanned the horizon again, her chest tightened, they weren't alone. Movement flickered far off, shadows shifting, weapons glinting. The enemy hadn't given up. The stronger soldier saw it too, his voice was ragged. We can't fight them all. Raised her rifle, steady hands, calm breath. We don't need to, we just need to hold long enough. The wounded man whispered, his voice barely a breath. And if you do? His eyes stayed on the scope. Then at least we don't fall quietly. The words settled heavy in the dusk. The enemy drew closer, the air thickened, the silence trembled. His heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. She thought of her father, of the range, of the lesson that had carried her through every shadow since. The hardest part isn't the shot, it's the choice. And she chose now. Chose to stand. Chose to fight. Chose not to leave anyone behind again. The enemy crept closer, rifles raised, voices low. Exhaled, her cheek pressed to the stock, her eyes sharp in the fading light. She whispered, almost too soft to hear, not tonight. The shot cracked, and the night erupted again. But this time, she wasn't crawling into silence alone. This time, two men waited behind her, alive because of her, ready to leave the ruins if she carved the path. And that was enough. Hours later, when the extraction finally came, when the roar of engines cut through the silence and lights swept the broken ground, lowered her rifle at last. Her hands trembled for the first time. The soldiers were lifted onto the vehicle, voices calling, hands pulling them to safety. Climbed last, her body aching, her chest hollow, her mind heavy. As the vehicle rolled away, she looked back one final time. The bridge, the ruins, the river, they shrank into shadow. They would stay there forever, holding her silence, carrying her ghosts. She adjusted her rifle, leaned back against cold metal, and closed her eyes. Sometimes, she realized, survival wasn't about orders. It wasn't about victory. It was about refusing to let silence decide who lived and who didn't. And sometimes, dignity didn't speak. It simply acted.